American history shows a clear pattern. Whenever Black Americans make measurable progress, backlash follows. That backlash has taken many forms over time: social resistance, coded language, and policy slowdowns. What makes this administration different is that backlash has moved from the margins into the center of governance. This is not about one speech, one comment, or one controversy. It's about a coordinated use of power. Policies are being reversed, protections are being stripped. Institutions that once acted as guardrails are now being weaponized. The message isn't subtle, and it isn't accidental. Previous administrations tolerated inequality. This one is actively rolling progress backward. It uses the authority of the state to dismantle civil rights enforcement, normalize racial grievance, and legitimize exclusion under the cover of law and order. That distinction matters. This administration doesn't just ignore Black advancement, it treats it as a threat. It governs as if equality itself went too far and now needs to be corrected. That shift from neglect to punishment is what makes this moment dangerous. This is not neglect of Black progress. It is an active campaign against it. Early presidents who enslaved Black people governed in a system that was openly and unapologetically racist. Black Americans were excluded by law, denied citizenship, and treated as property. There was no pretense of equality, no illusion of shared belonging, and no attempts to hide the hierarchy. What makes this moment more dangerous is not that racism exists, it's that it's operating after progress was already made. This administration governs in a post-civil rights America. It operates after desegregation, voting rights, anti-discrimination law, and decades of hard-fought gains. That changes the nature of the threat. Rollback is always more destabilizing than denial, because it teaches people that rights are temporary and can be withdrawn. Enslaver presidents never had to erase Black progress. They never had to pretend equality existed while dismantling it behind the scenes. This administration does both. It speaks the language of fairness while hollowing out its substance. It claims neutrality while targeting the very mechanisms that made equality possible. That distinction matters. When a government removes protections that people are actively using, it doesn't just block advancement, it creates fear. It signals that progress was conditional all along, and that Black advancement can be punished retroactively. This is not the brutality of the past repeated exactly. It is something more calculated. It is regression disguised as governance, carried out in a country that knows better and chooses to move backward anyway. Power doesn't always announce itself through force. Sometimes it works by making people disappear. This administration has made erasure a governing strategy. The removal of enslaved people's imagery and references from the White House narrative isn't about aesthetics or neutrality. It's about reshaping national memory. When slavery and racial violence are minimized, softened, or omitted, the country is taught to forget who paid the price for its wealth and power. This erasure shows up in how American history is reframed. Slavery becomes a footnote. Racial terror becomes divisive. Honest discussions about systemic racism are labeled un-American, radical, or dangerous. Truth itself is treated as a threat. That framing is intentional. When Black history is reduced or stripped away, it becomes easier to argue that present-day inequality is imagined, exaggerated, or self-inflicted. If the harm is erased, the responsibility disappears with it. Erasure isn't passive. It's not accidental. It's a political act designed to weaken claims for justice by severing them from their historical roots. When a government controls what's remembered, it also controls what can be demanded. This is how progress is undone quietly, not by denying Black existence outright, but by removing the story that explains why progress was necessary in the first place. One of the most dangerous shifts under this administration is how civil rights institutions are being turned inside out. Agencies created to protect marginalized groups are now being used to discipline them. The head of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission publicly encouraging white men to file so-called reverse discrimination claims is not a neutral act. It sends a clear signal about who the government believes needs protection and who it believes has gone too far. Civil rights enforcement is being reframed as a threat rather than a safeguard. Diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are portrayed as unfair advantages. Long-standing disparities are ignored, while white grievance is elevated and validated through official channels. This is an inversion of purpose. Institutions designed to enforce fairness are now being used to question the legitimacy of Black advancement. Instead of addressing discrimination, the focus shifts to punishing attempts to correct it. That reversal matters. When civil rights agencies stop protecting the vulnerable and start amplifying resentment, the entire framework of equality is destabilized. The law no longer functions as a shield. It becomes a tool, one aimed at rolling progress backward under the appearance of fairness. This is not neutrality. It is inversion. This administration hasn't just attacked policies. It has attacked the legitimacy of the civil rights movement itself. Public statements framing civil rights as something that harmed white Americans are not accidental or rhetorical slip-ups. They reveal the ideological foundation behind the rollback. Equality is being recast as loss. Inclusion is framed as punishment. Justice is treated as something taken from one group and unfairly given to another. That framing is powerful because it reverses moral responsibility. If civil rights are defined as harm, then dismantling them becomes corrective rather than cruel. Rollback is no longer presented as regression, it's sold as restoration. This is how grievance becomes policy. By convincing people that fairness went too far, the administration creates permission to strip protections away. Voting rights enforcement becomes overreach. Employment protections become bias. Representation becomes preference. Once civil rights are portrayed as an injury to white Americans, their removal can be justified as balance. That logic doesn't just distort history, it weaponizes resentment to erase hard-won progress. This isn't disagreement over policy, it is an attempt to redefine justice itself as a mistake. Economic power has always been central to Black progress, and this administration understands that. That's why access is being attacked at the gate. Legal actions targeting companies like Nike for refusing to discriminate against Black applicants represent a fundamental shift in enforcement priorities. Inclusion efforts are no longer treated as remedies for inequality. They're being reframed as violations. Diversity initiatives are portrayed as unlawful favoritism, and companies are pressured to abandon them under threat of investigation or lawsuit. This isn't about fairness in hiring, it's about control over opportunity. By redefining inclusion as illegal, the administration is working to close pathways that Black Americans fought decades to open. The goal isn't to create a level playing field, it's to roll it back to a time when access could be quietly denied. When corporations are punished for inclusive practices, the message spreads fast. Employers become cautious. Hiring slows. Advancement stalls. Black workers are left vulnerable, not because they lack qualifications, but because the rules have been rewritten against them. Economic sabotage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like policy memos, lawsuits, and legal pressure designed to make progress too risky to pursue. That's exactly what's happening here. Modern harm doesn't require chains. It works through policy. This administration has systematically undermined Black economic progress without ever naming race. Student debt relief has been targeted and blocked, even though Black borrowers are disproportionately burdened by student loans. Housing and lending enforcement has been weakened, making discrimination harder to prove and easier to deny. Tax and labor policies widen racial wealth gaps while presenting themselves as neutral or colorblind. The damage shows up most clearly in the labor market. Black unemployment has risen to pandemic levels. But the more alarming shift is what's happening beneath those numbers. Recent labor data shows that more than 300,000 Black women have been forced to exit the workforce. They're no longer counted as unemployed because they stopped seeking work. That exit didn't happen in a vacuum. It reflects layoffs without rehiring, hostile work environments, the rollback of workplace protections, and caregiving burdens made worse by policy choices. When enforcement weakens and protections disappear, Black women are often the first pushed out and the last invited back. Leaving the labor force is not recovery, it is displacement. Black women are frequently the economic anchors of their households. When they are pushed out of employment, the consequences ripple outward. Family stability weakens, community wealth shrinks, generational mobility stalls before it ever has a chance to take hold. This is how economic harm operates now. It doesn't announce itself with racial language. It works quietly through weakened enforcement, attacks on inclusion, and the elevation of reverse discrimination rhetoric by federal agencies. The outcome is predictable every time. You don't have to ban Black employment to destroy Black economic progress. You just have to stop protecting it. You don't need chains to restrict mobility. Policy can do it quietly. When policy fails to suppress progress, enforcement is used to do the work instead. This administration has expanded the federal enforcement posture in ways that reach far beyond their stated targets. Immigration enforcement and aggressive policing practices don't stay contained. They spill into Black communities through increased stops, surveillance, and the normalization of force as a governing tool. Protest has been reframed as disorder. Dissent is treated as threat. Surveillance becomes routine. Intimidation becomes justified as public safety. The presence of state power is no longer exceptional. It's constant, visible, and meant to be felt. These tactics are familiar. Throughout American history, Black resistance has often been met not with dialogue, but with discipline. The tools change, the language shifts, but the purpose stays the same: discourage organizing, silence protest, and make resistance costly. What's dangerous about this moment is how normalized it's become. Enforcement isn't presented as extraordinary, it's presented as necessary. And once fear becomes part of daily life, people begin to self-censor, self-police, and retreat from public engagement altogether. State power is once again being used to discipline Black resistance, not because it is unlawful, but because it is effective. What makes this presidency uniquely dangerous is not overt racism, it's coordination. Rollback is happening across multiple fronts at the same time: voting rights, the courts, the economy, education, culture, and enforcement. Each move might be defended as procedural or technical on its own. Together, they form a system designed to weaken Black progress without ever naming it directly. This administration doesn't rely on explicit segregation or racial language. It uses legality, bureaucracy, and rhetoric to accomplish the same ends. Protections are removed quietly. Enforcement is redirected. Inclusion is reframed as bias. History is softened or erased. Power is centralized, then justified as efficiency or neutrality. The timing is what makes this especially destabilizing. These actions occur after measurable Black gains: higher educational attainment, increased representation, expanded access to employment, and growing political influence. Reversal after progress creates fear in a way denial never could. It teaches people that rights are conditional and can be withdrawn once they're exercised too effectively. This isn't accidental. It's systematic dismantling carried out under the cover of governance. And because it looks legal, it's harder to confront, harder to organize against, and easier to normalize. What makes this presidency dangerous is not what it says out loud. It's what it methodically takes apart while insisting nothing is happening at all. Oppression is loud, erasure is quieter, and more effective. The goal here is not to recreate the past openly, it's to shrink Black presence until it no longer shapes outcomes. Political power is reduced by weakening voting protections and delegitimizing participation. Economic mobility is undermined by closing access to education, employment, and enforcement. History is stripped from the national story, so Black contributions appear marginal rather than foundational. This doesn't require violence to succeed. When erasure works, it doesn't announce itself. It feels administrative. It feels normal. And that's the danger. When a government makes Black progress harder to see, harder to sustain, and harder to defend, it doesn't have to say who it's targeting. The outcomes speak for themselves. Erasure doesn't need chains. It needs persistence. History will not be confused about this period. Future historians will not debate whether these actions occurred. The records will be there. The policy changes, the enforcement shifts, the court decisions, the rhetoric, and the outcomes. What will be examined is not intent, but recognition. Who saw it while it was happening, and who chose not to name it? This moment will be studied not as an accident, but as a pattern. A presidency that did not invent hostility toward Black progress, but refined it. One that learned how to roll rights back without spectacle, how to dismantle without announcing demolition, and how to call regression governance. The question history will ask is simple. When the rollback was visible, who told the truth about it, and who insisted nothing was happening at all? This administration did not invent hostility toward Black progress. It perfected its rollback. Thank you for tuning in to Leaving America Unfiltered. I'll see you next time.